Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, Conversations on Commercialization. I'm Tyler Cowan, Vice President of Syneos Health. In this series, we explore the strategies and innovations shaping healthcare today and tomorrow. This episode was recorded at the Fierce Pharma Week in Philadelphia, right in the heart of the action. Let's dive in.
So here we are at Fierce Pharma Week in Philadelphia. I'm Joe Daly, President of Addison, Whitney, and I am joined here by Mr. Bill Purdy, who's our SVP in charge of business development for Addison, Whitney. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Jill. Delighted to be here.
We've had a great couple of days, huh?
Very much so. A lot of activity.
A little tired at this point?
Very tired.
It's a remarkably large conference. There's a lot going on here. The supplier side of the pharmaceutical industry has shown up in a very, very big way. Bill, I think you know this meeting used to be 4 separate meetings, and now it's one meeting.
Yes, they've combined Digital Pharma East, the new product development, and Fierce. I think there's a fourth one.
The sessions, the educational sessions, are set up so that you can run on those tracks. We're here talking about ARI. ARI is our proprietary brand design application that is something we've customized for pharmaceutical naming. We launched it in the first quarter of this year. I think you'd agree that it has largely delivered on the value proposition that we were aspiring to deliver. And I think we're finding some really cool applications that go beyond what we even thought was possible. The name ARI. Let's talk about the name ARI. Where did that come from, though?
So ARI was a name that came out of an internal naming contest that we had. As you know, a lot of people were involved in the development of ARI. Dozens of people. We had a contest internally about how to name this new platform, and a lot of interesting submissions. One of the submissions, and these were ultimately voted on, we've received hundreds of submissions. Ultimately, one of the submissions, someone crafted a story about Aristotle, how he was the master of logic and language and reason. And this new platform that we were investing in was essentially Aristotle wrapped in AI. So ARI is reason wrapped in AI, A-R-I.
I just love that story.
It's good.
It's a great name.
Yeah.
We ought to do that for a living, name things.
I think we'd be pretty good at it.
Yeah, be very good at it. All right, so ARI solves for something in the naming space. And the simple statement is that when you name a pharmaceutical product, you have to run quite the gauntlet to satisfy regulatory screening, legal screening, a lot of stakeholders. And what ends up happening oftentimes is the original spark idea, the strategic catalyst, ends up getting lost in the process. What should be a very important trigger or asset in brand design and name suddenly becomes a chase to find letter strings that will satisfy those same screens, regulatory legal screens, such that they ultimately will get approved. That challenge, that's been with us for a long time. The reason that it's become more relevant for us is that logically, as more names get approved and as more names get filed, the space where names reside that don't look like or sound like other names or don't violate trademarks and payoff strategy is shrinking, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And the way that we've gone about naming pharmaceutical products, which I think you'd agree is a process that is 3+ decades old.
Yes.
And is used routinely across our industry. If you just do the math, if you produce more and more and more names subject to the same shrinking space, you're just going to have more and more attrition.
Correct.
And you're going to end up with names that are further and further from the original strategy.
That's correct.
What did that cause us to do?
So you're describing, and I think we've referred to it in different ways, but it's a peculiar journey, a journey that's been occurring for decades, that I think evolved out of necessity. Seemed like the logical way to go, to create names, take them through screening, find out what was left, and rinse and repeat, continue to do that. And that journey that you're describing, invariably, you start to have less resonance, less strategic resonance of the brand as you move away from the strategy to just try to fill a box with letter strings to get something approved. So ARI very specifically solves for that by understanding the regulatory and the legal hoops that you have to jump through. From a regulatory perspective, that's POCA analysis, phonetic orthographic computer analysis, which gives an insight into the look and sound similarity to existing products on the market. ARI has hardwired, when it creates a name candidate, to do that screening.
It's all built in.
It's all built in.
Yep.
It's built into ARI's hardwiring. In addition to that, ARI can do legal screening, the other hoop you have to jump through. So a name's created, ARI can look at what trademark classes, how many letters in the name, what geographies is it filed, to get that data point. So that's a due diligence that causes that attrition. But back to where ARI is solving for that is the strategic inputs. In the past, we used to have a kickoff meeting and say, hey, what do you want to call this, client? And they would give analog products and ideas, and verbal designers would come up with letter strings and cram them together and try to get them through screens. But that's the process of chasing letter strings and losing that strategic resonance. We built ARI specifically to take a massive amount of input, strategic input, the pillars of brand. So positioning statements, brand purpose, brand character, brand story, competitive intelligence. This is all information that we can put into a context field within ARI, and ARI can utilize that to understand the product and start to mine that to develop name candidates that are strategic. In addition to that, we still are aware that letter strings create names. We've developed a term called morphemera, which is based on the term morpheme. Morpheme is the smallest component of a name. We can identify morphemes that speak to strategic elements of a brand, and we can put those into the context of ARI as well. And then it becomes a very user-friendly experience where a verbal designer, once that input's been put into ARI, they can have a conversation with ARI and ask to structure names and create names based on certain strategic criteria based on the brief.
So if I'm understanding a before and after here, this is different in that all of the screening you're describing built into ARI is happening in real time as the verbal designer is front-loading all of this great strategic content and focusing on the creative outputs and the alignment of those creative outputs to the strategic inputs, while in real time, they're being filtered for regulatory and legal concerns such that you know immediately what you can continue to focus on as being the strongest paths for names that stay on strategy. That's what ARI does. Before, that was all done sequentially.
Yes.
I mean, that's really important here. Creative would create names. They'd literally hand them off to be screened for regulatory and legal concerns. There would be an exchange there, a back and forth, and that may take a week, 2 weeks.
Yes.
And that's brought back to the creative team, and then the creative team needs to address whatever those concerns happen to have been with new ideas that are then screened again and through the same process. The before is linear, it's progressive, takes time. ARI actually makes this a dynamic design process so that all of these things are happening in parallel, in real time, so that the verbal designer can focus their expertise on names that bring strategy to life.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes. And this linear process, which was the process of old, these sequential steps, these different siloed teams that now happen in a unified platform. And I say this all the time, we're not getting rid of humans. There's still human governance over this. The naming expertise requires legal insight, regulatory insight, strategic insight, verbal insight, linguistic insight. We bring all of those together in ARI. And what you're describing in this linear to a dynamic evolution, this dynamic design, it's doing two major things. The verbal designers and those teams in those linear silos spent a lot of time, effort, and energy screening those names and creating the attrition. So that is reduced from a time perspective. But the other thing, verbal designers would go down rabbit holes. Say the strategic imperative was a mechanism of action that had a 2 or 3 or 4 letter string that was a strategic imperative. And that could have been the basis of the brief and their exploration, only to find out days or weeks later that that's not really viable. There's too many trademarks filed. There's a phonetic or orthographic issue. We can now find that out real time. And so the verbal designer's exploration is more efficient, if that makes sense.
It does. And it also leads me to believe that the creative, the invented names that we put in front of our clients are of, I'll say, higher quality, meaning that what our clients are looking at have a lower risk of attrition. And this is important because how many times in the past have we been through this process with clients, and you actually get fairly deep into the process, say 2-3 rounds into the process, our clients fall in love with 2 or 3 of the ideas, only to find out weeks after the process has started, you can't have that. Not only is that disappointing and frustrating, but it's a tremendous waste of time by both parties, both the agency and on the client side.
Totally. And we are actually using it now in live workshops with the client, vetting those territories of exploration early on. And Ari can give us insight into what might be fruitful, what might not be fruitful, how can we mitigate that, or how can we leave that and go down another path. So that is immensely valuable to know early on, and that the client can experience that is they fully understand the complexity of naming and what we have to go through, and that they can see that look behind the curtain real time is very valuable.
So you have all the key stakeholders on our client partner side, marketing, regulatory, legal, the clinical team, many times they participate, and there are some other adjacent functions that participate on these naming teams on the client side. So you're saying you can use it in a workshop and all of those individuals can provide their ideas in real time to explore whether they're viable or not.
Yeah, a lot of times naming is an exercise in consensus building. You get different opinions from different leaders in the room, the regulatory folks, the legal folks, the commercial folks, and you can collectively vet those ideas now real time and come to consensus on, hey, these are fruitful paths we should explore. And that's immensely valuable to ascertain very early on versus the old process that you're describing that would take weeks or months to find that out. And then you've wasted all that time.
Very powerful.
Yeah, we're all excited about Ari. The other thing that I like to say a lot is that with the advent of AI, everyone talks about prompt engineering, and that's a huge component to this. Our verbal designers are very deft at how to interact and have conversations with Ari, how to engineer prompting to get certain things and how to get the prompting to mine the contextual inputs. But Ari is helping us predict. So everyone's prompting, Ari's helping us predict the viability of the name from a legal perspective, from a safety perspective, from a linguistic perspective, and from the client's expectation of what this brand can stand for. And it adheres to the brief that strategic resonance is sustained throughout the process.
You're touching on something that is a common subject when we're talking about generative AI. And that is it replacing our creative team in this particular case? What I'm hearing you say is, no, that's not. But can you expand on that idea? Is this a threat or is this an amplification?
I think it's an amplifier. AI, it's in every corner of our world. Everybody's using AI, whether you're a doctor or a ditch digger. There's an AI platform that'll help you be better at your job. If you're not using AI, you're likely going to be left behind. So we're experts at naming. It only makes sense that our experts help design this and develop this tool so that they can become better at their craft. So it really allows our team, back to that efficiency point, it allows our team to focus on the strategy and on the creation as opposed to time that they may have been wasted on more rudimentary activities like rigorous screening that can now be done or accelerated through this platform. So they can focus more on the strategy and the creative.
There are so many examples of strong names in the pharmaceutical space that represent the aspiration, the place we're trying to get to. Names that clearly are a part of a brand's strategy and contribute a strong voice to a brand strategy. We've used many times Wegovy. Skyrizi is another strong strategic name. There are several others. For you, are there names that come to mind that are particularly strong in the space?
There's a lot of good branding out there, and I don't want to disparage any names, but so names that are strong. In the pre-ARI area, a name candidate, Lynparza, was developed. It was the first PARP inhibitor, and the first indication was for breast ovarian. And the strategic imperative from the client was this needs to be a feminine-sounding name that communicates the MOA. So after 1,000 names, that humans created, Lynparza became the name. I think it's a strong name for the category. It was a little short-lived, however. They had secondary indications for prostate, so the strategy behind the name was a little faulty. And had we had Ari, I think we could have put in the long-term path for the asset and potentially mitigated that the name didn't necessarily have to be feminine. That one stands out, but there's so many others, Joe, that come to mind.
That's a great example where the ability to anticipate and to build deep strategic content into the front end of Ari is also so differentiating. And what it does is it drives the team, now I'm talking about agency client team, to be thinking about brand design, to be thinking about brand strategy, and to be anticipating where a particular brand is going to be relevant in today's and future marketplaces. All of that strategic thought now has a home early on in the brand name development process, which historically, again, before and after, has largely been a process of risk mitigation to get to a name that satisfies regulatory criteria. Ari enables us to shift the conversation, to shift the focus to brand strategy, because now there's a place to activate that brand strategy in the naming process that we didn't have before.
So true. It's the question, hey, client, do you want a name or do you want a brand? And what Ari does, because the focus shift that you're describing onto those pillars of brand, strategy, position, purpose, character, the competitive landscape, the features and benefits and the concepts to explore for a brand, the color palette, the logo, the character, all of those things become the focus of attention, and Ari crafts and builds around that as opposed to just finding a letter string, because all of those things conspire to build brand. The name is obviously tip of the spear and a huge component, but that works with the messaging and the logo and the package design and the imagery. So those are all huge components, and this application allows us to focus and craft true brand.
So Ari application, it's a brand design application, and we've been talking about Ari as a collaborator, and I think that's a fair way to describe Ari. The future for Ari, I mean, we're probably in 2.0, getting close to a 3.0 version of Ari at this point. Where do you see Ari down the road?
I see her core capabilities being expanded. So she's going to continue to expand. I say she. Ari seems like a she, but Ari as a platform is going to continue to expand capabilities in legal and in safety. Just to clarify, the process of creating names used to be singular. We used to create a name, this linear process, so namers would create hundreds of names, but they'd have to do it one at a time. And then the legal folks would have to screen them one at a time, and then the safety folks would have to conduct POCA one at a time. But all of that happens in massive quantities. So massive numbers of names can be generated. The POCA analysis can happen in batches. The legal analysis can happen in batches. So you're getting rid of the junk earlier on to focus on the strategy. So I think that's an important point to bring up. Those functionalities will expand. They'll even get quicker. But I think there's a lot of areas Ari can go. We're going to expand on linguistic capabilities, which is already happening. Things are happening so fast, the way this technology is evolving. So linguistic analysis is going to be expanded. We see potential opportunity for this as a platform to custom build for clients. So one of the biggest things that we try to solve for is mimicking aversion to risk. Every client has a different aversion to risk from a legal perspective, from a safety perspective. And so Ari was built with that in mind, and we try to toggle and move those levers to replicate that client's aversion to risk project by project. But we see a point in the future where we can build the infrastructure that company XYZ can take in-house, and they can toggle it themselves. We can guide them on how to use the interface. We can bring our expertise in brand to bear, but we see a future version of this that will be licensable, if you will. That could be a way that it goes.
I was going to say, do you ever see it offered in Apple Store?
It could be. It could be an app on your phone, Joe.
All right, Bill, that was a blast. Bill Purdy, by the way, and Nancy Globus. Nancy's responsible for our regulatory.
A brilliant safety medication error mind.
Both Bill and Nancy are the co-inventors of Ari. All right, Bill, it's been a blast. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap on this episode of Conversations on Commercialization. Catch the rest of the series and subscribe to the Syneos Health podcast wherever you get your podcasts. If you have other topics you would like to hear from us about, send a message to podcasts@syneoshealth.com. For more future-focused, actionable life science insights, visit Syneos Health Insights Hub at insightshub.health.